Mark, the gospel writer, is preaching to convert all these Muslims to Christianity. And you can see that these early stories of Christianity in painting are given a very specific interpretation. So from as early as the 14th, 15th century, there is a huge presence of Muslims in European biblical paintings, and many, many people saw these, and this was sending them a message as they actually looked at these paintings. You can see here, this is St. Stephen preaching in Jerusalem, with the old city of Jerusalem behind, with some of the minarets as well as the church towers. And again, he's preaching to women and to men with headgear. So there was a more and more inclusion of Muslims in these paintings. From the Italian Renaissance onwards, imagining what a biblical character looked like and how he was represented as a Muslim Turk became a matter of course. When artists in Europe wanted to depict a biblical character, they just painted him as a Turk with the Ottoman headgear. You can see here the great paintings of Rembrandt, for example, the way King David and Uriah, with the headgear here that you have here. You can see, as the one before, Rembrandt's very, very famous image of the story of Belshazzar's feast. Just in case you don't know this, it's the story behind this, of course, is in 587, when the Assyrians came to plunder the temple in Jerusalem in 587. They took with them all the precious vessels that they found in the temple in Jerusalem, in the Jewish temple, and they took them back. And in Assyria, they used these sacred vessels for bad purposes, to drink alcohol, and in a kind of brothel. And so the Assyrians, of course, are depicted as Muslims, which, of course, in 587 before Christ, how could they be Muslim? But this was the representation of evil characters in the Bible were depicted in art very frequently as Muslim. King Solomon in the Bible as well is presented because, according to the Christian Bible, the downfall of King Solomon was his marriage to many wives from different families, and there you have Solomon surveying his harem, which of course he's presented like this, but not in the Bible, but according to this tradition. Now, I want to in the 18th and 19th century, it became much easier for Europeans to travel to the Middle East, in that area that I showed you, from Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Egypt. When people began to move further into the Middle East, they no longer painted the Turk, but they moved to the kafia. So the Ottoman Turk was replaced by the kafia. You have this in many paintings. In the 19th century, Christian theologians took the Bedouin as representing the noble values of the ancient Jewish people in the Bible. And an article called "The Arab of the Desert" in a famous London magazine in 1865 says this. This article reads, "Who hasn't heard of the Arabs, that wonderful people who alone perhaps of all the races of the earth are today the same in almost every respect as they were in the very earliest times, of which even scripture history, the oldest of records, gives us account." In other words, if you want to find what biblical people looked like in the old days, you go and you look at the Bedouin. They are the real descendants of the Jewish people of old. As his fathers lived countless years ago, so the Arab lives today, and he will continue to live, if not in all future times, at least for many a generation to come. Now, according to Edward Said, at the time this was written, in 1865, England was at the heart of its industrial revolution. There was a huge amount of industry in Europe. And they said, well, Europe can change, Europe can become very modern, Europe can become very industrialized, but the Middle East and the Arab of the desert will never change, will never be the same. will always be the same. And this is what Eber Said argues is at the essence of Orientalism. You had Christian theologians, again, who said that if you want to look to find the descendants, the genetic descendants of Jesus today, you must go and to the Orient, and you must actually find the people. That you won't find the descendants of Jesus among the Jews, because they're scattered all over the place. But the best chance you have of finding the descendants of Jesus is in the fossilized spirit of Jesus is somehow in these among the Arab peoples. He said you'll hardly ever find a people that kept its customs for so long as the Arabs. They've never been brought under the yoke of other people. Everything we know about their customs coincides so exactly with the most ancient customs of the ancient Israelites. It gives the most richest meaning to the Bible. In contrast, the Jews scattered all over the European diaspora. We no longer know what they look like. So if you want to know what biblical people look like, you must go and find them somehow among the Arabs, and particularly the Bedouin. This was the view of the 19th century English theologians. And from now on, this is as an example, from around 1865, all biblical illustrations of the stories represented the ancient biblical people with kafiyah. You'll find this in a very consistent way throughout this period. And here is another one, the Tamar and Judith. And now I want to move to my subject, which is the art of the 19th century. And I want to take this as a specific example. Now, what was so objectionable about Orientalist artists in France and in Europe was that many of these artists, they never set foot in the Middle East. They did all their paintings in a studio in London or in Paris. And one of the key characteristics of the Orientalist painting was they wanted to paint in such a way that it looked like a photograph, that it looked like the reality. This was really historic reality. This was the most important aspect of Orientalist painting. It had to look absolutely as if it were historically accurate, even though there was no historical or social reality behind the paintings that they actually did. Jerome, for example, in France, never ever, for most of his paintings, he did them in Paris, not in North Africa. And what he did was he especially painted bath scenes, harem scenes, and what the first author I showed, Nochlin, finds objectionable about this is that she argues that these paintings said far more about the European artists who painted them than about the social reality. She argues that they were projecting onto the Middle East pictures that they couldn't paint in France. So, for example, they couldn't paint such a picture like this in France. So they said, well, this is the reality of the Middle East. And so they projected their own desires onto this. Orientalists in particular saw the Middle East and North Africa as a place of sexual excess. And you can see this in all their paintings. This is the cover of Edward Said's book, Orientalism. And you can see the air of reality that he wants to give with the Arabic script here. Again, these were all done in Paris, not here. Again, the slave market does not depict social and historical reality, but we wanted to give these kind of historical sense of reality for that. Again, Jerome painting biblical scenes. You wouldn't know they were biblical scenes except he gives it a heading here, which is David and Bathsheba. This is the story of David and Bathsheba on the roof of Jerusalem from the second book of Kings in the Old Testament in the Bible. And again, these giving a kind of sense of reality. Again, another story from the Bible, the daughters of Jephthah. And you can see how the Orientalists want to give the Middle East is this idea of decadence and sexual excess. This is the second book, whereas Jerome painted North Africa and the Middle East. There were many, many paintings done of Iraq. Iraq received particularly bad publicity from these artists because Edward Borer describes Iraq as the West's first great other. Not many people actually went to Iraq because it was too far away, and so they could paint it in whatever way they want. Now, in classical literature and in the Bible, Mesopotamia gets a very, 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 very bad press. And what these Orientalists did was they projected the decadence of the ancient times onto the contemporary inhabitants of Iraq. And I thoroughly recommend this book, Borer's book on Orientalism and visual culture with respect to Iraq. I showed these two because there were two massive, massive paintings that were done by the English artist John Márton in 1860. And you can't really see the detail of them, but they actually depict a huge decadent scenes, and he had to actually explain them because he twisted around the texts to actually make sure that they were as bad as could possibly be. In Paris, if you go to the Louvre, you'll find that in Delacroix's The Death of Sardanapalus, again is again you have this kind of very decadent portrayal of Iraq. Now, I want to move to another artist and to move on to the depiction of Jerusalem by the Orientalist artists. Now, when the Orientalist artists depicted North Africa, when they depicted Iraq, when they depicted especially those countries, they painted it as a place of great decadence, sexual excess, and everything else. But when it came to Jerusalem and Palestine, they couldn't do this. The reason being is because Palestine really was the only place where you had Christian sites. And so therefore you couldn't possibly have any kind of these. People wouldn't have bought the paintings if you wanted painted biblical sites the way you did them everywhere else. And so the paintings of Jerusalem are not like that you have elsewhere. Now, I want to, from now until next, ready for the rest of the talk, I want to concentrate on how Jerusalem was actually represented by these Orientalist artists. Now, I don't know if you know, there's a whole series of these prints are extremely popular in Europe. They're by a Scottish lithographer called David Roberts. And if you go into any home in Europe, especially England, you'll find lots and lots of prints. David Roberts traveled around all of Egypt, Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, and he did a lot of sketches of these paintings. But Kenneth Bendiner, an American, did a PhD thesis on kind of the message that he gives in these paintings, and I want to present that to you now very briefly. Bendiner argues that in all of David Roberts' paintings, he presents them in a specific way. He says that in his paintings, you'll always find a group of Muslims standing in front of a building that's about to fall to pieces. And he says, he would argue that these that the buildings that are about to collapse mirror or represent Islamic society that is in a state of decadence, and we know this because when he was actually doing these, David Roberts wrote to his daughter, I think, and he said this, for example, was the Temple of Amun in Egypt, He says, these splendid cities, such as the ones in Egypt, once teeming with a busy population, with temples, the wonder of the world, are now deserted or lonely. They're reduced by mismanagement of the Muslim creed to a state of savage of the wild animals in which they're surrounded. Often I gazed on them until my heart sank. So when David Roberts did all his sketches of the Middle East, this was kind of the perspective in which he actually did them. And we know this from, this is taken from the area of Jebel el-Zatoun in Al-Quds. You can see not the Al-Aqsa, but the Dome of the Rock in the distance. And you can see that this is the pool of Gihon. And you can see again the column, it's fallen into the stagnant water. And the group of Muslims here. And again, the message is that the landscape of this fallen landscape mirrors the decadent state of Islam at that time. This was the message that you have in many of Roberts' paintings. And you have this as well here in other parts of his another sketch here of the group below. Now, especially in Jerusalem, when the 19th century travelers went to Jerusalem, they discovered that when they went to visit the Christian sites, they were all being managed by Muslims, and so this was a surprise and unsatisfactory to many of the Europeans who come. And so you have this whole theme of mismanagement, that these sites are not being managed properly, which of course, we'll argue in a moment, led exactly into Zionist propaganda. But you have many of these paintings there. Just skip that for the moment. And one of the things that David Roberts and these Orientalists never did was they never ever painted Westerners in their images of the Middle East. They only painted what they regarded as local inhabitants. And at the same period as this sketch of David Roberts was done of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, that you see here, this was the reality. It was absolutely full of Western people, Western hospitals and everything else. So these Orientalist pictures, they weren't depicting reality in any sense, but they sold them as if they were. Just more of his David Roberts sketches. Now, you wouldn't know this, but in all many editions of the Bible from this period, many of them include sketches by David Roberts. So when you're actually reading the Bible, you're actually looking at these images as well. And not only that, but from 1890, and I actually saw some of these in the King Faisal Center in the Abdulaziz Library, many travel books around 1880 to 1900, Western travel books to Palestine. And I've got a good collection of them myself. And many of these travel books are illustrated by David Roberts' sketches of these. And in one of them, you have this comment from a Christian traveler who says, "The best feelings of our nature prompt us to preserve and protect from desecration such sites as the Holy Sepulchre. Local people say, strangers like you come with to distance with stories. Neither we nor our father have ever heard of them. There is no one in the locality who has ever connection with it." In other words, the message was being given across that the local people were mismanaging the Christian sites. And you have this as a more and more an important theme in Orientalist art. And then towards the end of the 19th century, the last of the Orientalist artists actually were very sympathetic to the beginnings of Zionism. And we know this from a comment in one of these guidebooks. It says, "As regards the restoration of Palestine, our general feeling like this: Palestine is a desolate land. Its desolation is not of a kind that's irremediable. Its desolation is owing to neglect. A house fallen into frightful repair needs to be put into order. The almost empty land must be stocked with a new race." Whoever said the land was empty? These adjectives coming in, creeping in more and more. Who said it was empty? It must be stocked with a new race, and they will manage the Christian sites better. And so these Orientalist paintings were feeding right into the hands of the early Zionists. And as one of the social historians said, when the British felt compelled to choose between Jews and Muslims, inevitably at that time, they chose to side with the Jews. But I don't want to go off the point there. Now, in the 1920s, in Jerusalem, when the early Zionist settlers came to Palestine, in the 1920s, they set up a school called the Bezalel School of Art. Bezalel, you may know from the Christian Bible, was the architect who built the Solomon's temple in the Christian Bible. And so they called this school the Bezalel School. And if you can see here, they actually call, they say that they produce all kinds of Oriental works of art. They feel that they are the proper, they are continuing this Orientalist tradition. They make a lot because it suited their propaganda message. And you can see here that in these little images on the side, these are very, very common Orientalist images throughout the 19th century. You can see that they're pointing to Palestine, and they're suggesting that, well, you can see here that the land is empty. They have many of these, and what they do is all the earlier Muslim people that you see in earlier Orient suddenly begin to disappear, and the land becomes more and more and more empty. You can see that you have a few here early Jewish settlers. You can see that the images are becoming very cleaned up. You don't have the same kind of disarray that you had in Orientalist paintings. And you can see the message that as the Zionists come in, they're cleaning up. They're doing all these things. They have many, many slogans to encourage people to come at that time. And you can see here, these are all posters all from there. Now, one of the earliest Zionist artists was Abel Pan. He was French. And the Zionists regarded him as embodying the Zionist message. And you can see the way he paints Jerusalem. He paints it with nobody there. The land becomes suddenly empty. Everybody's disappeared. And these images were scattered throughout Europe. Well, there's nobody there. Come to Palestine because it's empty.